In this Ring camera video, you can see a man exit the apartment, dropping something in flames on the ground before running from the scene.
I could hear her screaming and hollering for her life, and then by the time I was able to get outside and got all the neighbors out, the fire department and everybody was here.
Labor Day morning in DeKalb County should have been quiet. Most families were just waking up, kids still asleep, coffee brewing, sunlight creeping in across apartment walls. But at the Fairington Road apartments, something else was happening. At around 1 a.m., residents were jolted awake by the smell of smoke, thick, dark, and all-consuming. Some thought it was a kitchen fire. Others thought it was an electrical shortage. But then they heard it, shouting, screaming, frantic footsteps, glass breaking, and a voice calling for help from behind a locked door. Within minutes, the hallway filled with smoke so dense that people dropped to their knees just to breathe. One resident jumped from a second-story window to escape, being injured in the process, all with the intent to save his life and the life of the person still trapped inside. By the time firefighters made their way through the flames, they realized it wasn't an accident. The fire had a point of origin, it had intent, and it had a target. Inside that apartment, they found Stephanie Wiley, and her final moments would ignite a search for answers. What started as a routine fire would soon unravel into a manhunt across state lines, and investigators would learn that the flames at this home wasn't sparked just by chance. It was ignited by a very disturbed individual. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crime and Psyche with me, Drea. Today's case is one that forces us to confront how violence doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it builds quietly, behind familiar doors, disguised as control, resentment, and entitlement. What investigators would later uncover wasn't just a deadly crime, but a pattern: escalating anger, fixation, and retaliation when control was threatened. A situation that ended in fire, loss, and a desperate attempt to escape consequences. In this episode, we're going to examine what led up to that night, the suspect authorities identified, the psychological warning signs that often precede intimate partner violence, and why cases like this continue to happen even when people are actively trying to leave. This isn't just a story about how someone died. It's about the danger that can surface when someone refuses to let go and the devastating cost of that refusal. This is the case of Stephanie Wiley. Fairington Road in DeKalb County, Georgia, is the kind of place where mornings usually start slow. Rows of apartment buildings stand shoulder to shoulder, shaded by tall pines that line the complex. Families come and go, kids ride their bikes between stairways, and neighbors know each other by face, if not by name. The Fairington Village apartments, built in the late 1970s and expanded over the decades, sit right on the edge of both calm and chaos. Close enough to Atlanta to feel the city's energy, but far enough that many residents choose the area for affordability, community, and a quieter life. Holiday weekends there felt especially still. Cars sit untouched in the lots, porch lights glow through the night, and people use the extra day to rest, barbecue, or visit relatives. And Labor Day weekend of 2025 was no different. Late on the evening of August 31st, families settled into bed, expecting nothing more than a peaceful end to the long weekend. Apartment walls murmured with ordinary sounds, televisions winding down, someone laughing on the phone, footsteps upstairs, a baby crying softly in the unit next door. But around 1 a.m. the next morning, that ordinary quiet was shattered. People woke to the smell of smoke drifting through vents. The hallway lights flickered. Then came the sound: pounding, shouting, chaos building in seconds. A fire had erupted inside apartment 19, and within moments, the whole building knew something was terribly wrong. What no one realized yet was that this was not just a tragic accident. It was intentional. And the woman trapped inside, Stephanie Wiley, had been trying to distance herself from a man who refused to let her go. But before the fire trucks, before the news crews, before the apartment complex became a scene of smoke, ash, and disbelief, there was Stephanie Wiley. She was a 48-year-old mother whose world revolved around her children. She was a daughter whose family described her as gentle and caring. She was a friend who everyone remembered for her bright smile and calming presence. People close to her say that no matter how chaotic life could get, Stephanie had a way of grounding the room, steady, warm, and protective. In the months leading up to Labor Day of 2025, Stephanie was working hard to build a new chapter for herself. She had recently settled into a unit at the Fairington Road apartments in DeKalb County, a sprawling but quiet complex where families came and went, neighbors kept mostly to themselves, and life unfolded in the predictable rhythm of everyday routines. For Stephanie, that apartment represented a fresh start, a place to breathe, rebuild, and focus on her kids. But behind the scenes, she was navigating something far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone realized. Stephanie had been distancing herself from a relationship that had begun to feel unsafe. Her ex, Sean Fales, who was 44 years old at the time, had increasingly become someone she didn't want in her orbit anymore. She never publicly called him violent. She never filed a restraining order, but the people closer to her noticed the change. She had started expressing fear. She had become more guarded, and she was trying to create boundaries. Family members later told reporters that Stephanie had said she wanted space, that she was trying to move on, and that she felt like her ex simply wasn't letting go. And tragically, that moment, the moment when a woman begins to pull away, is so often when control escalates into something far worse. Just before dawn, most of Fairington Village was still asleep. The air outside was thick with humidity, the kind of stillness that settles in just before morning. Inside the complex, lights were out, doors were closed, and nothing felt out of ordinary until the smell hit. Residents would later say it wasn't like burnt food or an electrical shortage. It was sharp, chemical, immediate. One neighbor said it burned the back of their throat the moment she stepped into the hallway. Another woke up coughing, convinced something was seriously wrong. And within minutes, confusion turned into panic. People heard banging, someone screamed for help, a window shattered, thick black smoke poured from beneath one apartment door, and that was the door of Stephanie Wiley. Across the hall, Stephanie's teenage son woke up to the sound of crackling flames. He tried to reach his mother, but the heat was instant and overwhelming. Smoke swallowed the room, and he had seconds to decide. He broke a window and jumped. The fall left him with a shattered pelvis. In his agony, he screamed for help and tried to get back toward the building. But unfortunately, Stephanie never made it out. By the time firefighters reached her unit, the fire had already consumed much of the apartment. Visibility was nearly zero. Flames spread too quickly, and Stephanie Wiley died inside the home she believed would offer her safety. It didn't take long for investigators to realize this was no accident. The burn pattern, the ignition point, the speed of the flames. Fire marshals called it accelerated. Deputies called it deliberate. And almost immediately, one question arose above all others. Who would want this to happen? As investigators interviewed neighbors and family, a consistent picture began to emerge. Not of chaos, but of quiet concern. Stephanie had been trying to create distance in the weeks before her death. People close to her said she seemed guarded, careful, like someone who was weighing every move. A neighbor recalled seeing a man show up uninvited weeks earlier, lingering outside of her building. Family members said Stephanie had been pulling back, emotionally and physically, focused on protecting herself and her children. There was no restraining orders on record, no public warnings, no formal paper trail. When investigators began asking who might have been involved, one name surfaced immediately: Sean Fales. Deputies attempted to contact him immediately, but they couldn't find him. Not at work, not at home, not by phone. His silence was impassive. It was immediate. And to detectives, it didn't feel accidental. From the moment the fire was ruled arson, Sean Fales became the primary person investigators needed to locate. But by then, he was already gone. Once the fire was officially classified as arson, the case shifted from a tragedy to a homicide investigation, and detectives moved fast. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex captured a man approaching Stephanie's unit around 1 a.m. on Labor Day morning. He appeared to ignite something near the door, and seconds later, flames erupted. The man ran from view, slapping at his clothes as if they were burning. Neighbors told investigators they recognized him. And within 24 hours, the DeKalb County authorities had enough to act on. A warrant was issued charging Sean Fales with murder, aggravated assault, and arson, tied to Stephanie's death and her son's injuries. His image was circulated statewide, then beyond Georgia's borders. But the man they were searching for was already crossed state lines. And now, the case wasn't just about what happened inside one apartment. It was about how far someone was willing to run once the fire exposed everything. The manhunt ended not with a dramatic standoff, but with a small routine decision on a highway in Alabama. On September 2nd, 2025, officers in Lynette, Alabama, just off I-85 in Chambers County, pulled over a vehicle during a traffic stop. The driver was identified as 44-year-old Sean Fales, wanted out of DeKalb County in connection with Stephanie's killing and the arson that destroyed her apartment. He was taken into custody without incident and booked into the local detention facility on a fugitive from justice charge while he awaited extradition back to Georgia. From there, he would face murder charges, aggravated assault charges, and arson charges. There was no standoff, just a quiet traffic stop and an arrest that confirmed what Stephanie's family already feared. The danger she was afraid of had been real all along. In the days that followed, the story of who Stephanie was began to push through the crime scene tape. Her family described her as funny, loving, and the kind of person who will lit up her room. One relative told local media, Stephanie was someone who loved to laugh, with a big smile and a sweet spirit. Her son, who survived by jumping from a window to escape the flames, suffered serious injuries and was hospitalized, but thankfully recovered. Family members described how he tried to reach her, how he tried to save his mom before being forced to make that impossible choice between staying in the fire or jumping for his life. Multiple units in the building were destroyed. Several families were displaced. Neighbors described hearing her screams, seeing her silhouette in the upstairs window, and then suddenly, the screaming stopped. Many have said they still hear that sound when they try to sleep. Online, a GoFundMe was created to help Stephanie's family and support her son's recovery. Comments flooded in from relatives, co-workers, and strangers who were simply moved by the story, all echoing the same sentiment that she did not deserve this. So when you take a step back from the timeline, when you look past the fire, the arrest, the frantic escape from that burning apartment, you start to see a pattern, a blueprint that is tragically common in domestic violence cases, especially when a relationship is ending. Psychologists who study intimate partner violence point out something very chilling. The most dangerous time in an abusive or unstable relationship is when the victim tries to leave. That's not an exaggeration. It's one of the most documented patterns in domestic homicide research. When Stephanie started pulling away, when she began emotionally distancing herself, when friends noticed she seemed scared, that was the escalation window. To an unstable partner, separation is not just rejection. It feels like a loss of control, a threat to identity, and even a personal humiliation. And the research shows violent partners are up to 6 times more likely to become lethal after a breakup. Arson is one of the top retaliatory methods in domestic violent homicide cases. And most heartbreaking of all, victims often sense the danger long before it becomes visible to anyone else. Stephanie sensed something. Her family felt it too. And investigators later confirmed she had been trying to create distance from Sean. She just didn't live long enough to fully get out. When law enforcement looks at cases like this, they're not only examining physical evidence, they're examining patterns of behavior. What stands out in this case aligns with well-known profiles of coercive, retaliatory partners, such as efforts to maintain control. Partners like Sean often escalate when they feel they're losing their emotional grip. That can look like showing up uninvited, monitoring a partner's movements, manipulating through guilt or pressure, refusing to accept a breakup. Friends and relatives later reported Stephanie seemed anxious around him, a subtle sign that there had been attempts to control her long before the fire. Another is rage tied to abandonment. For many abusive partners, the breakup itself feels like an attack, not just emotionally, but psychologically. This creates a mindset where retaliation becomes justified in their distorted worldview. It's not just about love, it's all about power. And then escalation toward violence. Arson is not typically the first act of violence in a relationship. It is often the final, catastrophic one. FBI data shows that intentionally setting fires in domestic cases are almost always meant to destroy a partner's sense of safety, intimidate, punish, or eliminate. It's not random. It's symbolic and devastating, and it is deeply tied to control. And then there's the flight afterwards, leaving the scene, crossing state lines, avoiding police contact. This behavior aligns with offenders who act impulsively during the crime, then try to create physical distance and hope that time or geography helps them escape responsibility. Sean running to another state wasn't the behavior of an innocent man. It was a final attempt to stay in control, even after destroying Stephanie's life. When you look at the overall psychology, the distancing, the fear, the attempt to leave, the sudden violent retaliation, Stephanie's story tragically mirrors thousands of domestic homicide cases across the country. These crimes don't come out of nowhere. They follow predictable behavioral traits: entitlement, control issues, fear of abandonment, a belief that harm is justified if a partner tries to leave. When someone like Stephanie pulls away, the unstable partner often doesn't think, oh, she's moving on. They think, I'm losing control and I need to get it back. And that's when they become dangerous. But here's the most important part. Stephanie did everything victims are told to do. She tried to leave. She tried to distance herself. She talked to people she trusted. She moved into a new place. She tried to rebuild. And in many domestic violence cases, that's exactly when the risk becomes highest. Her story is not about a woman who didn't act soon enough. It's about a system that still struggles to identify and intervene in the most dangerous moments, the moment when someone is trying to reclaim their life back. In the end, this case isn't just about an apartment fire. It isn't just about a suspect fleeing across state lines or an investigation that pieced together the truth after the damage was already done. This is the story of Stephanie Wiley, a mother, a sister, a friend, a woman who tried to build a new life, a safer one, and never got the chance to finish it. It's also the story of something we don't talk about enough. The moment someone tries to leave an unstable partner is often the moment they face the greatest danger. Stephanie sensed that. Her family sensed that. And yet, like so many victims, she was still alone in that fear until it was too late. But her story doesn't end only in tragedy. It leaves us with a reminder, one we can carry forward, because we have a responsibility to look out for each other, to pay attention to the quiet warning signs, to take people seriously when they say they are afraid, and to make the space for conversations that help someone get to safety before the worst can happen. Because even though this case may be over, the larger issue is not. Domestic violence is still happening in every community, behind closed doors, in private messages, in moments people are too embarrassed or too scared to share. If Stephanie's story teaches us anything, it's that every voice matters. Every check-in, every "are you okay?" every time we decide not to look away. And if you or someone you know is experiencing fear, control, or violence in a relationship, please reach out. There are local hotlines, national resources, and people who will take you seriously, even if you feel like no one else will. So thank you for watching this episode of Crime and Psyche and for giving Stephanie your time and attention. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and stay curious. See you in the next video. Bye.